On today's Faith versus Culture, we talk about marriage, the value of family, and the hope the church can offer in today's world. All of that's coming up.
To have sex before you're married is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
There are problems of sin and habit that cannot be solved outside the person of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Faith versus Culture here on the CBN News Channel. I'm Goins-Phillips, joined by my co-host today, Billy Hallowell. Billy, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm excited to have our guest today, J.P. Gance, the president of Communio. J.P., for people who might not be familiar with you and your work, and of course what happens over at Communio, before we get too much into our conversation on today's episode, give us a little background of what Communio is and what you do there.
Yeah, well, we're a ministry that serves the local church. Our purpose is to equip the local church to share the gospel through the renewal of healthy relationships, marriage, and the family. That's the big felt need of our present moment. Marriage is in crisis right now, and 85% of all churches are spending no dollars in this area of marriage ministry, and we think there's a huge opportunity for the local church to take action.
Yeah, you raised a couple of things there that we're going to get into all of this, but why do you think churches are not actively engaged in this? I mean, that's a pretty big number of churches not devoting funds to help marriage.
Yeah, when we work with churches, we've identified 7, we call it enemies of metanoia, these barriers to taking new action in this critical need area, right? The marriage crisis is a new crisis. Okay, we have to recognize that. There's a reason you may not have had marriage ministry in the 19th century, although certainly would be needed then as well. Today there are 31% less people getting married than in the year 2000, 65% less people getting married than in the year 1970. So the challenges to marriage are certainly new. From a mindset perspective, I think a lot of churches believe that growth in faith and holiness will lead to greater marital outcomes, which is certainly true. I wouldn't dispute that, but it fails to that posture of engaging first in growth in faith and holiness fails to consider that for a lot of people, they begin to grow in faith and holiness because of their marriage, and that if we can actually help people around that felt need, they'll go on that journey, right? When Jesus walked the earth, he certainly performed signs and wonders, but those were not card tricks. Jesus cured the sick, he healed the lame, he fed the hungry, he solved real problems. And right now, the real problem and challenge facing so many couples, so many individuals around this epidemic of loneliness is this absence of healthy relationships. We as humans, God wired us to want to know and to be known, to love and to be loved. And our culture today has waged war on that concept. And so we need a different posture within the local church to serve into this present moment.
I think a big issue coming up against a healthy view of marriage and even a healthy view of sexuality right now in our culture is the transgender movement, right? I think we'd be kind of remiss to not talk a little bit about that, especially given the Supreme Court just hearing oral arguments on a law in Tennessee that protected minors from or protects minors from transgender-related procedures. And if anybody wants more information about that, you can go to cbnnews.com and read, about what happened there. But we learned a few things during those oral arguments that these transgender treatments do in many cases cause infertility. They do lead to regret among people who undergo them, and they don't necessarily decrease suicidal rates, which has been a big sticking point in the argument for transgender affirming care. So I know there's a lot there, JP, but I just wanted to ask you, what do you make of that debate, and how much does that factor into our really unhealthy view of marriage and sexuality in today's culture.
It's a symptom of the disease. Okay, what we fundamentally, the evil one has waged war especially over the last 65 years or so, on the sexual embrace, on marriage itself, on the relationship between husband and wife, the decoupling. We saw the decoupling of sex from marriage in the 1960s and the triumph of the sexual revolution. And then the separation of what that leads to is a separation of parent-child, and frequently dad no longer being daily present in the life of his children. Okay. And what we're seeing with certainly this issue in the trans issues, you're seeing this just next logical step of the sexual revolution play out, right? And these ideas are certainly a lot older than the last 60 years. I mean, many of these ideas you can make the good case are grounded in the ideas around the French Revolution, which was not just a political revolution, but a social, cultural, and sexual revolution. A lot of those ideas were limited in time and scope because there just wasn't the technology that we've developed over the last century to really make those ideas of those Paris salons take to life on so many American college campuses and in so many of our communities.
Yeah, one of the things that we're also seeing that is happening culturally is this obsession with the self, right? You go back a few years, it was the selfie, and that was something we could kind of laugh at. But what we've really seen is that people have really looked inward the more we've moved away from a cultural faith or talking about faith as much culturally. We've seen that inward focus. How much of that do you think is driving what we're seeing with marriage, with reproduction rates, all of those declines? How much of that do you think is part of that dynamic?
It's central in many ways, right? We have gone and shifted our view and understanding of our pursuit of happiness and how we should pursue happiness. I credit my friend Dr. Brad Wilcox in his book Get Married, which really lays out so much of these core arguments on expressive individualism. The ancients would have, and up until the 20th century, the idea a purpose was found outside of the individual, going out and your purpose was, for instance, living self-sacrificially for somebody else. You wouldn't. Happiness was a byproduct of a life well lived. It would have been strange to just seek happiness as its own end, and as a consequence, over this quest that we've been on as a culture toward self-definition of our own purpose, of our own happiness, has led to a lot of unhappy people and a lot of lonely people. All right, we've got, objectively speaking, we've never been in a time in our nation's history where there's more lonely people. It's leading to shorter lifespans. Okay, so it's not working very effectively, and it's also threatening civilization itself. Right? There's fewer and fewer Americans. So other than the fact that people are less happy, more lonely, and we're now at a level in our civilization where our birth rate is becoming an existential crisis. Other than that, it's working great.
Yeah. Look, there's a whole lot more to discuss, JP. We're going to fit in a quick break, but everybody stick with us. We'll be back with more on the other side with JP. Welcome back to Faith versus Culture here on the CBN News channel. We're joined by JP Gance from Communio. JP, one of the big questions that comes to mind whenever we're having the conversation about marriage is how to engage in it from a compassionate, vantage point and understand that there are people in different phases of life coming at it in different areas. Because I think often the conversation can turn to, I'm shaming this young person for not being married yet, right? And there are people, Christians, who fall into two different camps. People who think, I'm never going to get married just because I can't find the right partner. I mean, I'm 32 and just getting married, and that's like in Christian years, it seems like I'm 50 years old sometimes because Christians are supposed to be married so young. That's the conversation we often have. And then there are others who feel completely content as a single person in the ministry work that they're doing, whatever it is they're doing. So how do we have the conversation of realizing there are people in different phases of life, but also marriage is a sacred thing that God ordained, and it has a purpose, obviously, to procreate and to fill the earth. So how do we have those, or how do we carry those two things together?
Yeah, I think it's critical for the local church to be practical. Okay, I think one of the best ways to engage compassionately in this area is with this. We need to stop assuming that our young people actually have been formed by our culture and by our families to be able to pursue marriage well and to know how to discern marriage well. We have to stop assuming that. So nobody, we live in a very different age and era as a consequence of the smartphone, social media, the ubiquitous of dating apps. There's just so much more that our young people have to contend with, men and women, okay? And so, I coach a high school homeschool football team. Okay, a bunch of evangelical families, and it's really a great joy. And I lead devotionals with the team and get very practical with the boys about talking to them. They're in high school, right? They range in age from 14 to 18, and I'm able to share with them in a practical way what leads to most frequently to happiness. Okay, on average, the happiest people in our country are married people with kids, okay? Our young people need to know some of the data around it, but then on a practical basis, what does it look like to date and discern a relationship well, right? I co-wrote a book with my friend, Dr. John Van App, Endgame, the Church's Strategic Move to Save Faith and Family in America. And in there, we have his five dimensions of human attachment. Okay, how dating, how we bond, and those five dimensions are: if you imagine a soundboard, know, trust, commit. No trust, rely, commit, touch. Okay, they're just different sound levels if you think about it. In our society, we want to move to touch immediately, right to the top. You move that knob all the way to the top, and then we ask the question: why do you feel betrayed, or why do you feel like the way that you do when you move so quickly to sexual touch, right? So we actually should progress naturally through an engagement where we get to know the person. We don't trust them more than we know them. We don't rely on them more than we trust them. We don't commit to them. This is a big challenge for a lot of Christian couples, is they almost pretend to be married way too soon. They're committed at a point much sooner than they should be, right? And you never move to sexual touch before before marriage, right? Those points. And so there's ways that the local church can both teach it in a practical way, the skills to discern, are you a better version of yourself or a worse version of yourself when you're dating that person? Okay. And I tell, so one, it's certainly being practical. It's also encouraging our young people to be intentional about our relationships. We're not telling you need to get married at 22 or 23, although it's a perfectly healthy and normal age to get married. The key is, don't dismiss the idea of a committed relationship. Right? There's a lot of people who get this idea in their mind: I'm too young to get married at 24. That is not historically true. Okay, that's not been true in human history. It hasn't been true in our recent history. Okay, anywhere between the age of 24 and 26 is a super normal time historically for folks to get married. So it's the posture of helping folks know that they should prioritize in their life, be intentional, right? It means you got to meet somebody else who's a fit, right? And then on a practical basis, I think I share it with people. We all have lists. People come up with a list of the things that are the non-negotiables that you need to have. It's important to know what you're looking for. But frequently, I think I share with the boys, share with others. I had my own list, and I thought exactly what I was looking for in my future spouse. And then I met my wife, and she didn't have most of those things that I thought were important. And thank God for it. She was strong in areas that I was weak, and she made me more than who I was, right? And so both men and women today, we take a very consumer approach to dating, where we've got this long list. We swipe to the right, we look for somebody else, we treat the other person as a consumable good rather than an end in of themselves. I think this is a great opportunity. This time, this moment is a great opportunity for the local church to speak life into a dead part of our culture, to provide real practical know-how grounded in the unchanging truths of the gospel that will lead our young people to making decisions that are going to increase the likelihood of their own happiness. Okay, and of course, just as you said, Trey, we're not looking. It's encouragement and not judgment. It's giving people the tools and the know-how. I've never had somebody criticize our remarks for being judgmental. It's empowering to know the how to do this and get the encouragement to be able to do this.
You know, when you look at some of what you mentioned before, the church, the fact that so many churches are not currently doing this work, you're encouraging them to do that, and what you just said, and you look at the stats of where we are with marriage in this country right now, how confident are you that the tide can be turned around? You know, talk a little bit about that hope.
Yeah. So first off, 66%, 2/3 of Gen Z say that they're excited about the idea of getting married. Okay. We've got a lot of raw material to still work with. The United States is, while church attendance is on the decline, has the highest levels of faith practice of any developed country, really, and certainly large and developed country. And so the church is still incredibly relevant to so many people's lives, right? And God's hardwired us for this, right? We're not trying to get people to do something that goes against our nature, right? We badly want to love and to be loved, right? We don't know how to do it, and our culture is constantly feeding us this idea that actually career and acquiring all this stuff and all these experiences and all these things is what's really important, what will lead to happiness. And that's actually not true. On average, these things are good things. Career is a good thing. Advanced degrees are good things, okay? But they're lesser things, right? These are lesser things than what God has planned for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, JP, for people who want more information about you and your writing and the work that you do at Communio, where can they go to read those articles and to get involved in some of the ministry opportunities that you have?
Yeah, anybody can go to communio.org, communio.org. We've got a free study. I would encourage anybody to download communio.org/study. It goes into a lot of the data, some of the stuff that I've shared here, a lot more that I would encourage you to read it. Read it if you're in a small group or at your church. Read it. There's some 10 takeaways on how to make this stuff relevant and active for the local church. I mean, ultimately, I have great hope that right now we've got this. People are excited about young people are excited about the idea of marriage. There's a lot of loneliness. There's a lot of hurt in our world, and we actually have the answers. We've got the answer key that we can provide to our young people. So that gives me great hope. And the church is just not yet engaged in this area. 85% aren't spending in this area. And if the church became as effective and engaged in this area as they've been spending and engaged with in youth ministry, you'd see a major transformation.
Yeah, I mean, 100% marriage between one man and one woman, that's God's idea. So it's no wonder that it's under attack so often in our culture. And it's important to have these resources to protect it. And the hopefulness that your work provides is an encouragement. So JP, thank you for being here with us today.
Hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Trey and Billy.
All right, everybody, stick with us. We'll be right back with more Faith versus Culture. Welcome back to Faith versus Culture here on the CBN News Channel. I'm joined by Billy Hallowell. Billy, I think one of the things that is really encouraging is if you look at a lot of the data, the fertility rate among the general population is decreasing, but the fertility rate among married couples is about the same as it was in the early to mid 90s. So married couples are still excited about having families and growing their families. That's exciting and I think encouraging. So more than having kids, I think the argument needs to shift to, or the case needs to shift to, explaining why marriage is so important and why it's the backbone of our culture. And I think, like I said during our conversation with JP, marriage is God's idea. It is the backbone of society and of culture. And I think that is why it's so often under attack.
Yeah, well, and when you look at what's happening right now, we've seen Bible increases, 22% increase, this month over last month, people going out to, or I'm sorry, the first 10 months of this year versus the first 10 months of last year. You're seeing people, I think, realize something is wrong and take a turn back to fix it. And I think you're going to see that with marriage, but I do think the church has to step out and really communicate what you just said, so that people understand the benefits of it. But I do think, again, where we are right now, this very troubled, weird time, I think younger people in particular are starting to wake up that maybe they've been sold some lies. And I think that carries over to this area as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are a lot of encouraging signs that we're seeing throughout our society, like what you just referenced, and even a new Lifeway research survey, and we have a story about it up on FaithWire and CBN, showing that while less than half of Americans are planning to attend church services at any time during the Christmas holiday season, the encouraging thing in that research is that they did say that many of them who don't go to church would go. More than 50% said we would go if someone would invite us. So again, there are a lot of encouraging signs in our society today, even though we're facing a lot of difficult issues. So it was a good conversation. Everybody stick with us. We'll be right back to wrap up this episode of Faith versus Culture. That is all the time we have for this week's episode of Faith versus Culture here on the CBN News channel. Thank you so much for being here for that conversation. If you want more news from a Christian perspective, as always, head on over to cbnnews.com. You can check out all of our latest articles there, as well as check out our Quick Start podcast that goes out every weekday morning. We cover all the news from a gospel perspective, which is so important in today's culture. Thank you so much for being here, and God bless you.